mediumship in one form or another is as old as history itself. It goes back to the ancient Greeks, probably further than we have no written records of it. The human race as a whole showing keen interest in the prospect of communicating with its dead ancestors, relatives, and friends, even though mediumship has been at odds with science and scientific worldview ever since science first began to eradicate the whole superstition on scientific thought. So the human interest in communication with the dead poses a paradox for modern society and modern science. Our society cherishes and favors scientific ideals. This begs the question, why the paradox? In the face of open skepticism, scientific criticism, and common sense. And Gary Schwartz, he talked about this a bit last night, how he is shunned by a lot of scientists, even though he's doing legitimate scientific research. And I believe that we deal with mediumship and similar type things because we have an innate intuitive sense that life itself is more than just the sum of physical components of the living body. Therefore, some part of the life must survive death because death only deals with the physical body. And this intuitive notion is seemingly devoid of scientific or logical support. Emphasis on the word logical, as opposed to intuition, which is always logical. But it still persists. The logical conclusion to this is, scientific community will never accept mediumship until life is defined and it is proven that some physical portion of life survives the death of the living body. Now, Gary Schwartz is trying to prove it from a different direction I am. He's doing the practical application. I'll speak to that in a moment. I'm looking at it from a theoretical perspective. Excuse me a moment, my code is right. Now, such a proof can only come in two different forms. Survival could be established as an experimental fact, as Gary Schwartz is trying to do. But all experimental proofs seem subjective rather than objective. And if not, they're claimed so by the skeptics. The subjective nature of mediumship negates any independent and objective experimental verification of mediumship, which is why Gary Schwartz is so careful to try to objectify his experiments as much as he can. Now, many skeptics will only accept some spectacular event, such as a person's return from death, before they would accept survival. And then they might not even accept such a momentous event. Supposedly we have that. Various religions, people have come back from death. Of course, the skeptics don't accept that. They have to come back from the dead before they accept it. Those have at least spoken from the dead, as Gary Schwartz said last night. The second type of proof, survival, will only be proven by the development of a physical theory of death, or better yet, a theory of everything, a TOE, T-O-E for theory of everything, for which survival of death would evolve logically from the theory. The theory would require. Experimental theory will always be viewed by suspicion by the scientific community when considered independently. Without theoretical support, any physical or other evidence for survival will be open to counter-interpretations or misinterpretations that do not involve survival. This is what the skeptics play on. There's no theoretical backing for survival, so the skeptics can misinterpret as much as they want or give counter-interpretations of survival. So, in the absence of a viable and testable theory, all experimental work meets with over-restrictive conditions by the skeptics, and the skeptics demand an extraordinary and impossible amount of evidence for survival. The logical conclusion, the scientific community will never settle the issue of survival until a theory predicts survival. Survival must emerge out of the theory and physical theory. Now I'm suggesting a new approach. Proposition, physical theory of death and survival is absolutely necessary before scientists will accept even the possibility of communicating with the dead. We have to say what survival is. Before we can say what survival is, we have to have a theory of death. Before we can have a theory of death, we need a theory of life, which does not exist in science at present. Theories normally are based on experiment or observation. Yet there are no criteria, scientific or otherwise, for from the evidence of survival itself. Notice Gary, we had one question last night for Gary. Did he have a physical theory? His hope is increased that we will develop a physical theory. But we can't develop a physical theory from his data because we don't know where to start with it. We don't know what to do with it. Now, Gary Schwartz and colleagues have collected data from, quotation, people who receive and share meaningful information with persons who were deceased. This is from one of his published papers. Basically, mediums. Now, there are 6 possible explanations for his data. Deliberate fraud, faulty perception, statistical coincidence. Those are what skeptics blame survival on. Now, we can rule out the possibilities of these 3. So then we go to the 3 scientific explanations of this data. The psi hypothesis, or super psi, that possibly it's not survival of death. It could be telepathy. It could be some form of telekinesis or psychokinesis. It could be clairvoyance. The 5th explanation, also scientific, is called the systemic memory hypothesis. And this only 6th hypothesis is that the consciousness survives death. And that's what we're aiming for. Now, we can get rid of the first 3 possibilities, deliberate fraud, faulty perception, statistical coincidence, just by being careful with our experimentation. That leads to the scientific explanations of Gary's work. Now, we can eliminate most of the problems introduced by the concept of super psi. Basically, survival is some type of clairvoyance or ESP. By carefully designing our experiments to negate the possibilities of clairvoyance, remote viewing, and telepathy. We can design those experiments so that we can see them survive. The systemic memory hypothesis can be eliminated as a possibility by careful design of the experiments and a strict choice of the test subjects. Now, if we eliminate these other 5 possibilities, the only possibility for explaining this data is the survival of consciousness, and that's what we're aiming for. But even now, if we eliminate all of the possibilities, so this data is going to be explained by survival of consciousness. One important point is still about scientists who adopt that hypothesis. Experimental problems still remain, even if we eliminate all of the possibilities. To wit, there is no guarantee, and as yet, no real indication that science will be able to isolate and define any physical quantities associated with survival. And except for the question, Gary didn't even deal with the physical properties. We saw the pictures with people with the ECG hookups. He is collecting physical data, but he doesn't know what to do with it. And that's a problem for all people like Gary who are working with the experimental map of survival. In fact, science does not even know how to proceed toward this end. You must have at least some idea of what you're looking for before you can define and measure it. And definition and measurement are the beginnings of any scientific theory. As yet, there is no physical basis or framework for understanding the physical nature of death in context of the definition of life, let alone the conscious survival of death, the survival of consciousness after death. Anomalies associated with the survival of consciousness would normally be made to fit into or be interpreted within the present scientific paradigms. But there's absolutely no place for survival within the present scientific paradigms. In the world of physics, quantum theory rules. And there's nothing in quantum theory, really, at this point in time, which will allow for an explanation of survival of death. The only real alternative then is to, the only real alternative to looking at experimental data, again, is to eliminate all the alternatives for proving survival, except for the possibility of developing a new and unique theory of everything, literally a new theory of physical reality to account for death and consciousness and the survival of consciousness. The logical and emergent necessity of survival from the theory of everything would force the scientific community to consider the reality of survival. Now, this alternative is the only acceptable possibility for establishing survival, and survival is a necessary precursor to any possible Before we can understand communication, we have to have a theory of survival. And what survives that? That's the big question. Now, what type of a theory can we look for? The key to the theory is distinguishing between what is both material and physical in our world and what is physical without being material. Now, the problem science has with mediums and all types of psychics is you use scientific terms and you use them incorrectly. I'm sorry, you use them totally incorrectly. It's like the mediums and the psychics are talking totally different language than the scientists. You use vibrations. Well, vibrations have a certain meaning in science. The way you're using the term doesn't work. You talk about energies. Well, there are only two types of energy in physics in the universe. Kinetic energy and potential energy. Which is it? Kinetic, the energy of moving objects, or is it potential? And a psychic or someone who's using the term energy just falls flat there. We have to speak the same language before we can develop theories. In physics, materiality refers to objects composed of matter and thus characterized by the masses. So something is material if it has mass. So many kilograms, so many grams are slugs in the English system. However, there are things in physics which are physical without being matter or being material. Two types of things, physical without being material. One are fields, gravitational fields, electric fields, magnetic fields. Light waves are fields. They're electromagnetic in nature. A light wave, a photon particle, does not have mass. Therefore, it is not material. But it carries energy. It is field energy. Therefore, it is physical, but not material. So fields are physical without being material. Spatial temporal relationships between material objects are also not material, yet are physically valid. For example, if we take an ensemble of particles and we look at their characteristics, we can tell what an ensemble of atoms and molecules, how they move according to Newtonian physics, what they would have effect on a large scale, microscopic world. So we can look at how molecules bounce inside a box and derive the gas laws, the ideal gas laws. You know, if you heat a gas, it expands, things like that. Now we're looking not at the material particles. We're only looking at the relationships between the particles. Now the relationships between the particles are physical. The particles are material, but the relationships between them are just physical. So we can derive physical laws. So we have two ways. We can have physical without material. Fields and relationships. Now, the only serious scientific attempt to derive a theory of survival was made in the 1870s by Peter G. Tate and Alfred Stewart, both well-known mathematicians, physicists in Britain. It was called the unseen universe. And they based their theory of survival on thermodynamical principles, which are relationships between particles. I know of no other. If anyone knows of any other attempts to build a scientific theory of death and survival, please inform me. But that's the only one I know of by legitimate scientists. Now, what facts do we have to work with? Any theory seeking to explain the survival of consciousness must be preceded by a more general theory of consciousness. Many scientists now suspect that any theory of consciousness must depend upon the concepts of chaos, complexity, and emergence, all of which address physical relationships between material particles, not the matter of the particles, or not the materiality of the particles. At the most fundamental level, we assume that consciousness is associated only with living and thinking beings. And many people, many scientists will limit consciousness to humans and possibly dolphins. And then there's big arguments whether dogs, cats, and other living things have consciousness. But the only thing we can guarantee that has consciousness thoughts, memories, ideas, mind, and consciousness to known physical quantities devoid of materiality, that suggests that consciousness, which is what we're looking for, is either a field, property, or relationship between material particles. Now, as I said, there are two ruling paradigms in physics. Quantum theory is the actual ruling paradigm, with relativity theory close behind. Now, which do we want to go with? Quantum theory in physics or relativity theory? Eliminating materiality renders modern quantum theory in the form of what they call quantum field theories far less likely as a candidate for a complete theory of consciousness and then a theory of survival of consciousness. Indeed, human consciousness seems to be a pure field effect related to electromagnetism. Therefore, an electromagnetic field theory, or better yet, a unified field theory, where you can unify electromagnetism, gravity, and the other basic fields, seems a far better candidate to develop a physical theory of consciousness, which is required precursor for survival of consciousness. Now this runs counter to present paradigms within the physics of consciousness and physics itself, because the quantum theory paradigm rules science. Now the quantum theory paradigm deals with the discrete nature of reality. Everything has to be reduced to particles in quantum theory. So, if you take the extreme of quantum theory and you take a field like the gravity field. Now, field is continuous. The quantum is little discrete particles. They're mutually incompatible, two basic ideas behind it. Now, field theory, gravitational field, the moon is attracted to the Earth by gravitational field. It goes back hundreds of years, the evidence. Quantum theory says, no, we have to reduce that attraction. It's not a field, there's an exchange of particles. So according to quantum theory, the moon is shooting gravitons, little tiny particles at the Earth. And the Earth is shooting gravitons at the moon, and that's how they attract each other, gravitation. They've never discovered gravitons. They never will, they don't exist. But they keep trying. Because in quantum theory, you have to have a fundamental particle sometime instead of the field, the continuity. You have to have an exchange of particles. Those particles will have some type of mass at some point. So, if we can get rid of quantum theory, what do? We look at field theory. Now, little side note. I went to the Tour de Science and Consciousness Conference in Tucson in April. It's held in Tucson every other year. This was Tucson 5. And the odd number of years it's held in Europe or Asia somewhere. And the even number of years it's in Tucson. And it's interdisciplinary. There are probably 400 or 500 people in attendance, scientists from all fields. No one agreed on what consciousness is. But the predominant physics view of consciousness is called quantum consciousness. And if you don't have a paper on quantum consciousness, you end up not talking. So I and the other people looking at the field view of consciousness did poster sessions at this conference. I have to align my thoughts with them, so the next conference I can actually give a talk. They don't realize I'm saying the same thing they are. It's just I'm saying it's like a different language. I have to educate them before I give the paper. But it's called the Arpr model of consciousness, and you have these little microtubules, water molecules, sort of spiraling up your axons in your brain, and they feel that consciousness is when those little water molecules can align themselves in what's called coherent nature, and that's consciousness. And my idea is they're never going to find consciousness in little tiny water molecules making microtubules in the axons and the nerve cells in the brain. And a lot of other people feel that way. But quantum consciousness has to bring consciousness down to the point of a single particle. I'm waiting for them to make conscious ions or photons or have some special thought particles, because that's the way they do it. Whereas the field theory is looking at the whole brain, the whole body all at the same time. That's where consciousness exists. In the brain as a whole, not in the individual particles of the brain. Now, where do we go then if we can eliminate this bringing consciousness down to particles? Well, we go to a 5-dimensional space. We use relativity theory, because relativity theory is based on curvature of space and time. Now, relativity can very easily get rid of the concept of mass and matter by reducing mass itself and matter to curved space-time. Einstein did it in 1950 and 1960. It's called the general theory of relativity, the other leg of modern physics. Then in 1921, Theodore Kaluza developed a combined electromagnetic gravity field by adding a fifth dimension to Einstein's four-dimensional space-time. You have three dimensions of space. Time is the fourth dimension. So we don't talk about space and time. We talk about space-time. Because changes in spatial position affect time, changes in time affect spatial position. That's a special relativity in 1905. But Kaluza added a fifth dimension and was actually able to show the combined electromagnetic gravity field. This theory has been ignored since 1921. It was successful, but it wasn't broad enough to make any predictions, so it was untestable. So science has ignored it. But it's been correct since 1920. So this is the best candidate for a theory of consciousness. Now, Kaluza suggested, did not require, but only suggested, that our extension in this fifth direction must be extremely small, smaller than the smallest atom, molecule, or particle, because we do not sense our extension in five-dimensional space. We can sense time, width, depth, height. We can't sense the fifth dimension. Therefore, it must be very small, our extension. But in 1938 and 1941, Einstein, Peter Bergman, Valentin Bargmann, other colleagues of Einstein's, demonstrated mathematically that smallness is not required. We can actually have macroscopic. Our five-dimensional extensions can be millions of miles, and you can still get electromagnetic theory combined with gravitation theory. So Einstein was working on this theory, the five-dimensional space-time. He gave it up. Why did he give it up? Well, if the fifth dimension could be macroscopically, our extensions in five-dimensional space could be very, very large, millions of light years in length. Why didn't we sense it? It presented a paradox for Einstein, so he gave up the search and went and looked for his unified field theory in another direction. So we need another approach. 1870, 132 years ago, William Kingdon Clifford, mathematician, young mathematician of Britain, developed a concept of four-dimensional space with a separate time, which is essentially the five-dimensional theory today. And he said our three-dimensional space is a thin sheet that is curved into the fourth dimension space. Again, when time is 7. So, just use Clifford's idea. Our material existence is in a four-dimensional space-time that's like a sheet. So, if we say this is space and this is time, these are three-dimensional space and this is time, we live within this sheet. But the sheet can curve into the fifth dimension. And it's the curvature to the fifth dimension that is matter. But we're stuck in our material world inside the sheet, so we cannot normally sense what's outside the sheet. Now that's a modern version of Clifford's 1870 theory. And then material particles, such as protons, electrons, and neutrons, all become orbital bends and folds in the sheet, like I just tried to demonstrate. Material reality as we know it is confined to living within the sheet. We live within this four-dimensional sheet. But we are extended five-dimensionally outside the sheet. So what's in the sheet is material and physical. What's outside, our existence outside the sheet, is physical but not material because matter is within the sheet. Now, we have a point by point. Every little point in four-dimensional space-time is extended like a circle coming around the fifth dimension. So we are extended within the fifth dimension. Every mathematical point is extended. That's the mathematics of the situation. Now, our normal senses only act through physical contacts between material objects within the sheet. Sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, all act within the sheet. That's our normal perception. So we don't have a normal perception of our existence outside the four-dimensional sheet. The fifth dimension is a single continuous field. So in actuality, our four-dimensional sheet is actually the densest part of that single field. And there's no need for separate discrete particles. When you're talking five-dimensionally, it's only when we're talking about in the sheet, four-dimensional particles. So quantum theory acts only in the sheet, not in the fifth dimension. Varying field densities correspond to the sheet and particles. Changes in five-dimensional field densities are transmitted via the fifth dimension. Now, we can look more macroscopically. Again, this is your three-dimensional space, your dimension of time. And so I have the diagram that's not showing up. We haven't got that fixed. I have a diagram on the PowerPoint to show you. So that's me. That's my curvature in five-dimensional space. Now my actual senses are in the sheet. But you see I extend a little bit into the fifth dimension. Now this is my physical part. Extended into the fifth dimension, above and below the sheet. Now, if I could do a double curve here, we would normally be only connected with each other through the sheet, but we are also connected across the fifth dimension. All particles, since we are all part of one single field, the superfield. Gravity, electricity, magnetism, all added together. All particles of the universe are connected across the fifth dimension, just as all are connected within the sheet by the gravity field. So all particles are connected. This necessitates the possibility that living beings sense events throughout the rest of the universe extra normally. Normal being within the sheet, four-dimensional space-time sheet, extra normally being outside the sheet, physical but not material. Now, so extra sensory means extra dimensional in this fifth dimension. All of our normal experiences are moderated by physics within the sheet. The sheet is the densest portion of the single five-dimensional field. Our material world exists within the sheet, but each point in four-dimensional space-time extends in a line in the fifth direction. So we can actually mathematize, we can build a mathematical model of our extrasensory perceptions. Everything along the lines of five-dimensional space, now the sheet is physical without being material, as I said. Now, under these circumstances, human beings are also extended into the fifth dimension where they can have unsuspected, physical, non-material existence, called an astral body if you want. I don't care. It's not a scientific term. I'm not going to use it, but if you like it, that's the astral body. Beyond their normal, everyday, four-dimensional world. This explains why life, mind, consciousness, and paranormal phenomena are beyond our normal five-dimension, our normal five senses in four-dimensional space. Now, to start off with basic chemistry. Normal chemical reactions in four-dimensional space-time cause field variations in the five-dimensional extensions. Sort of like every particle is curved in the fifth dimension. So as you have energy changes, that particle extends further into the fifth dimension, and then as it slows down, loses its energy, it collapses down towards four-dimensional sheet. So you get a chemical reaction. Chemical reaction would be particles going like this, up and down in the fifth dimension. So you get a reversible chemical reaction. What happens is these particles, instead of randomly going up and down in chemical reaction, they start aligning, going up and down together. Their energies start to cohere. Energy exchange starts to cohere. When you get different chemical reactions, where each chemical reaction is sort of sticking up in the fifth dimension, coming down, so it exchanges energy. When you get different chemical reactions that cohere together, so they all go up the fifth dimension, down together, and form a pattern. Different chemical reactions will take special properties. Now that's called a complexity when they form a pattern. That is the chaotic complexity. The first lowest level different chemical reactions. That pattern up in the fifth dimension is called life. So life is something extra beyond our four-dimensional existence. So life emerges from this theory. Life is required by this theory to evolve. Life then, once it's evolved, has a chaotic complexity, a pattern in five-dimensional space. Life then acts as an organizational principle for the chemical reactions in four-dimensional space from which it emerged. Then life further organizes and controls the organism's internal chemical reactions to improve the normal functioning of the body, survival. A two-way dependence of life on material body and body on life evolved. So life is a physical but non-material quantity. Now, it starts enhancing itself. The physical four-dimensional body comes in contact with more stimulus from the environment. So its function in four-dimensional, chemical function, four-dimensional space-time becomes more complicated. So it starts evolving stomach, mouth, appendages to move around in four-dimensional space-time, specialized functions. It starts evolving organs, functional organs. Eventually it becomes complicated enough, the body of four-dimensional space, with five-dimensional life organizing it. It becomes complicated enough, it has to evolve a new functional organ to rule over and control the body in four-dimensional space. That is called brain. But as the brain evolves in four-dimensional space, simultaneously there's an evolution of a new super pattern, a second complexity in five-dimensional space. It corresponds to the brain. Anybody want to guess what that is? Mind. Yes, that is mind. Mind is the five-dimensional extension of brain. Then mind rules over brain, over body. They have to organize each other down. At the same time, they're built up, evolve to each other. So now you have a super double complexity of mind, brain, and body. Now, mind acts through the brain, but corresponds to the whole body from which it ultimately evolved. So mind is not stuck in the brain and corresponds to the whole body. It just acts through the brain. Now, the body continues to grow, become more complicated. Because now the body, it comes in contact with more stimulus throughout four-dimensional space. You know, hot, cold weather, sunny, good food, bad food, whatever it comes into contact with. Brain starts collecting memories. What are memories? Electromagnetic patterns in the brain. So, you collect more and more memories. Finally, the brain becomes aware of more and more things in its environment. The brain learns that there are people in Australia right now, which is a different location in space, even though they're not local, that's non-locality. There's a moon out there, even though I don't see it right now. So the brain learns about the non-locality spatial position. Then what does the brain learn next? Well, gee, there's a time before we got here today. This is the present moment. Through its memories, the brain learns of the past. Then it projects that, so there's a future. So the brain learns of past, present, and future. Develops a sense of time, the flow of time. Now, when the flow of time the brain becomes aware of the flow of time, has enough patterns, electromagnetic patterns of memory up here, it evolves in the fifth dimensional, corresponding new organizational principle called consciousness. So that is what consciousness is. It is a third level chaotic complexity mind, life, and body through the intervention of the brain. But again, consciousness is not in the brain. It is part of the whole body from which it originally evolved. It only acts through the mind, which acts through the brain. While mind and consciousness act through the brain, they correspond to and envelop the whole organism, not just the brain. The concept of consciousness has emerged naturally and logically from five-dimensional physics. So what we have, the total complete structure, you have chemical reactions evolve life. Life organizes chemical reactions. Life evolves mind, mind organizes life, organizes chemical reactions. Mind evolves consciousness, consciousness organizes mind, organizes life, organizes chemical reactions and functions in the body. Each level reinforces and stabilizes neighbor above and below, either through evolution or organization. So each level, in the language of physics, each level is entangled with other levels, adding extra structural stability and coherence to the whole physical model. That's physics. Now, unfortunately, this is the point where I have a diagram summing this up. But I'll try and sum it up without my whole diagram. Now, we learn of the world around us through our five senses, which only work in four-dimensional space-time. But we are extended into the fifth dimension. Then across the fifth dimension, outside the four-dimensional space-time sheet, we have connections to the single field with every other particle and living body in the universe. So guess where telepathy occurs? Through the consciousness. We normally get sensory input from four-dimensional space-time senses up to consciousness. But consciousness is part of the single field. So somebody, if one of you is thinking something really nasty about me right now, you're going to get the chemicals reacting in your brain. You're going to cause little shifts in five-dimensional space-time in your consciousness pattern. My consciousness pattern is going to pick that up through five-dimensional space-time, and I'm going to know that you're thinking nasty thoughts about it. That's how he is people. Okay? So it's basically extra dimensionality is extra sensory perception. If so, our minds working together in the fifth dimension is telepathy. If it's my mind affecting a piece of matter, it's psychokinesis. So I just explained how all paranormal phenomena work across the fifth dimension. Isn't this simple? Nobody's thought of it. And this is a logical extrapolation from a theory Albert Einstein was working on in 1938, 1941. He just didn't go far enough. He was brainwashed by the mathematics and forgot his physics, is what it amounted to. He became more of a mathematician than a physicist in later life, and a philosopher. Death. So what happens in death? Well, in death, the chemical reactions stop. Major chemical reactions stop. Brain activity stops. So that disrupts the first level of complexity, life. Disrupts life. But life is acting as a buffer. Above life, you have two more levels of complexity, mind and consciousness. It's like life absorbs the chemical death of the body. What happens to mind and consciousness? They're mutually coherent. They're holding each other, stabilizing each other. So when the body dies, we have what I call a mind-consciousness complex that exists as a stable pattern cast free from four-dimensional space-time in the fifth dimension. You want to call it soul, fine. Soul is not a scientific term, so I call it mind-consciousness complex. I don't know what soul is. I'll say nothing about God. That's not a scientific concept. It doesn't mean I don't believe in God or anything else. It's just it's not a scientific concept. I'm doing science right now. But we can now account for death of the living body. That, the mind-consciousness complex, survives as an independent pattern in five-dimensional space. The silver cord is broken, the connection to the brain. Went from up here to the back of the brain in voices, pictures. Well, geez, that's sort of what I just said. That whole thing's broken. So now we've got mind-consciousness complex. I can almost guarantee, in fact, I will guarantee that each one of us will survive as mind-consciousness complex in fifth dimension when we die. Rest assured. Now, again, logical deduction. Where do we go brain to the mind resulted from four-dimensional contacts between the organism, body, and its material, four-dimensional environment. So the mind is used to having input all the time. Even while we're sleeping, the mind is getting input from our little sensors in the body and the brain. So you die. The brain isn't functioning anymore. The body isn't functioning. So what is the mind to do? It's still expecting sensory input. Well, there are a couple of possibilities here. The mind is expecting sensory input when it dies. The mind doesn't realize that the body has died. So it's still trying to get sensory input from the brain. Two possibilities. Total blackness, nothing. If you want to call that hell, I don't care. It doesn't realize it's dead. It doesn't realize it has contact through the fifth dimension, through the consciousness, because we're going body, life, mind, sensory input. One possibility, total blackness. Blackness people see it in different experiences. I don't care whether it's a tunnel or whatever, just the blackness. Second possibility, the mind, consciousness, complex does not realize it's dead. It tries to remain attached to four-dimensional space-time. It has no body. Gee, what might we call that? Gee, does that sound like a ghost? Still trying to affect four-dimensional space-time, not realizing it's dead. Somebody comes along and says, go into the light. Realizes it's dead. It goes into the light. Also going into the light in a moment. So now that's hell and ghosts are accounted for. And spirits with whatever you want to call them. Other possibility. The mind realizes it's dead. What do we get from that? Well, the mind realizes it's dead, so what's it going to do? It's going to search for new sensory input. Data, give me data. So, it starts receiving data via consciousness connection with the rest of the universe through the fifth dimension. Now, what is the first thing the mind would recognize? Something familiar. The mind is made up of all these patterns that are inherited from the brain. But now they're single field variation patterns in the fifth dimension. It accesses its own internal patterns. And what does it come up with? Its past life. It relives its life. But now it's up here in fifth dimension. Remember, space and time are in the four-dimensional sheet. What is time up here? There is no such thing as time up in the fifth dimension. Time up in the fifth dimension. Here's my time axis. Big Bang, Big Crunch, the whole universe. If I'm up here in fifth dimension, I've got all the time below me in an instant. Because instant doesn't mean anything in fifth dimension, you're outside of time. So, the mind, accessing its own memories, goes through a past life review, one possibility, in a moment. It's outside of time. There's your past life. What else can it do? Well, the mind realizes it's dead. Consciousness is in contact with the rest of the universe around it through the five-dimensional connections. It starts inputting data through its five-dimensional senses. So now data, sensory input comes from consciousness from the fifth dimension down to mind, where mind is keeping things together, interpreted. So what's the first thing the consciousness experiences? What fills this room? We take away the air. What else is affecting every point in this room? Anybody want to guess? Fields. What special kind of fields? Light. Electromagnetic fields, light. Right. At every point, every mathematical point in this room, even ones between air molecules, there is light. The light extends into the fifth dimension. That's the wave nature of light. It's a five-dimensional extension. So the mind experiences light when the consciousness reaches out to the rest of the universe. What kind of light? Purple light, red light, all the colors of the rainbow. Well, it's infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays, microwaves, all wavelengths and frequencies of light at the same time. Now, in our conscious four-dimensional interpretation of that, what would that be? All colors of the rainbow are white light, but we include infrared, ultraviolet, and all the other. So how would we interpret that? As a super white light. Maybe with gold or other hues, depending on what the brain interprets. Gee, there's the white light we experience. It is the consciousness accepting its new existence as a working individual part inside the rest of the universe. Again, only from logical deduction of this theory. What else might a person, according to near-death experiences, experience right away? Being met by a loved one, right? Or a religious figure, or a friend. Let me see, I'm way out of my notes. I call that the welcome light. The mind might experience welcome light. Well, the mind knows it's dead, but it's still accessing its own patterns, its own internal patterns. Which patterns would be most prominent in the mind? Which ones had the most energy during life? So react with your mind. Emotional. Anything that's emotional. Emotional is a gigantic chemical reaction to your body. It causes the little atoms and molecules to jump up and down the fifth dimension. That causes a really big field density variation, which is transmitted everywhere. So that's loved ones, friends, and normally religious figures because they have big emotional responses. So the first thing, if you don't get the white light, or even after the white light, your consciousness is going to look for things with which it is familiar, its own internal patterns of loved ones, friends, and they're already out there. They resonate together. And so that's the welcome light, why you see loved ones, friends, and so on and so forth. Is anybody having fun yet? Skip that one, skip that one. So basically, this theory predicts near-death experience results, the properties of near-death experiences. It says what survives. What about enlightenment? Now, these guys sitting cross-legged for hours trying to think. So what do when they get enlightened? They forget about their selves. What are their selves? Their connections with their four-dimensional bodies, space, time, and environment. They literally stop as best they can their sensory input. So what happens if you can stop all it's a death-like state? What happens if you stop all your sensory input? All that's left is your consciousness. You hear those subtle things that your consciousness is telling you by its contacts with the rest of the universe. Buddhist, Hindu, Taoist, Christian, mystic enlightenment is nothing but sort of mimicking the death state by quieting the four-dimensional space-time sensory inputs, your normal five senses, and listening to what your consciousness is telling you by its connection with the rest of the universe. When enlightenment comes, it slightly alters the pattern, your consciousness pattern in five-dimensional space, and affects the rest of your life, because consciousness organizes mind, organizes life, chemistry, so you can do fantastic things. ESP, because you're not connected, you know that connection in five-dimensional space-time, so you got ESP in mediumship, whatever. This is how mediumship. The medium somehow, whether through natural enlightenment or just some knowledge of five-dimensional space-time, is able to access these little brain patterns and connect via the fifth dimension with the beings that are there. The mind consciousness complexes of previously living people. Now, how does medium do it? What were the examples Gary gave us last night? Metaphors. These mind consciousness complexes don't talk directly to people. They provide metaphors. If you had a dog named Peanut, it might show you a peanut and a poodle. So you figure that you have a dog named Peanut. That's one John and I did on TV. That's what I remember. It's one of those great things that he got just out of nowhere. He said, "Did you have a little dog named Peanut?" I mean, woman thinks, "Oh my gosh, I had a little dog named Peanut when I was 3 years old." That's one of those outstanding things. That's why I believe John Word is real. They communicate by metaphor, because metaphor is the resonance patterns in your own mind. So they find whatever in your mind will resonate with their thoughts and convey the message. That's the metaphor. That's why they communicate by metaphors. Do they talk to the brain? No. Your whole body is like an antenna extended to the fifth dimension. Your brain is actually the tuner amplifier, like a radio. The radio, the antenna picks up the electromagnetic waves, then they're tuned and amplified by electronic gizmos. Okay, Your brain is the tuner amplifier. Your body is the antenna. So, if they're communicating with that GSP, whatever, it affects the whole body. That's actually been pretty much shown by experimental hardcore evidence. So this theory also explains some of the properties of mediumship and other paranormal phenomena. Skip that one, I'll skip that one. So we have testable predictions from this theory. Life, mind, and consciousness correspond with whole living organism and body, even though mind and consciousness communicate with the host organism and body through four-dimensional brain. Therefore, direct five-dimensional communication would affect chemical reactions in the body directly without the intervention of brain. We can hook people up to plethysmograph and different types of electronic devices, and their bodies react when they're sending signals to each other, showing the body reacts without the intervention of brain, which is what I'm saying. The bodies are acting like antennas. So this is a testable prediction of my theory. In a sense, what I'd argue to do. This is supported by anecdotal evidence. Some mediums and psychics have described their experience as feelings affecting their whole bodies, not their brains. The quantum people are doing quantum consciousness. Where are they trying to locate consciousness? In the brain. Where is consciousness? The whole body. They're never going to find consciousness. Their theories will never work. Now, this fact alone should lead to experimental verification of contact when they start looking at the body instead of the brain, because the brain is just part of the whole body, but only under the strictest of laboratory conditions and controls. Conclusions. Experiment alone cannot resolve questions raised by the possibility of some form of survival after death of the human body. Experimental evidence is and will always be open to counter-interpretations by skeptics unless the experimental evidence is supported by a theory. Then they reinforce each other. Protect them against skeptics. The only way to resolve this issue is to develop a theory or framework for the conclusive interpretation of data, such as Gary gave last night. He's the data person, I'm the theory person. Any theory using experimental data, which is questionable without theory, to develop a survival theory which explains nothing other than survival, would be suspect by the scientific community. So a theory independent of survival, such as a complete theory of consciousness, offers the only solution to questions regarding survival. Then that theory of consciousness would have to be based on a new theory of physical reality, because consciousness is part of physical reality and has not been included in physical reality since René Descartes separated mind and body. That's now coming back in as being considered by physics as a single reality, both material and physical, without being material consciousness. Scientists will never accept the possibility of communication such as that practiced by mediums until survival has become an established fact. And this can only be done by developing a theory of physical reality, out of which theories of both consciousness and survival emerge naturally as a consequence of the physics alone. In other words, consciousness and survival consciousness are part of the substructure of the physical world. In this case, single field theory is the only theory which can be used to form a working framework to explain consciousness, survival, communication, and mediumship. Done? I made it within my time, so I see the slide. Sorry for technical difficulties, I tried. My computer's still sitting there.
Yeah, I think we have the wrong table, I'm just not sure.
Okay.
Questions? You mentioned that quantum theory is based primarily on the particle concept, and yet out of quantum theory comes the Bell theorem of non-locality, in which information is transferred over infinite distances with no time factor.
They have the Bell theorem, they cannot explain that. You have to go to continuity to explain it. So you have to go below the quantum structure, the structure law of the quantum, to explain it. I explain the single fields. It takes about 10 seconds.
But Bell theorem comes out of quantum theory. In other words, when Einstein
It comes out as a paradox that can't be solved within quantum theory.
No.
They can't explain the non-locality.
I know it cannot be explained, but the fact of the matter is that when Einstein brought up that mind experiment, the EPR paradox, he said quantum theory cannot be correct because you would have infinite.
It cannot be complete. It doesn't say correct. It cannot be complete. It's incomplete. Is what Einstein said.
I thought that wave theory or field theory also would apply. Quantum theory does support some concepts of wave transmission, you know.
It does. But quantum theory has run into all kinds of problems. It predicts gravitons. There ain't none. It predicts a half-life for protons. There ain't none. It predicts the existence of quarks, the independent existence of quarks. They've known quarks for years, but not the independent existence of quarks. There ain't none. Quantum theory keeps predicting things that aren't there. And no one's raising a cry against it except a few people like myself. Now, why is it predicting things that aren't there? Because it's looking for discrete particles with mass, when in fact, reality below discreteness is continuous, a pure field. Quantum tries to mimic the field, calling it a quantum field theory, but their field is mathematical, not physical. Quantum theory is a mathematical model, it is not a picture of reality.
Does your theory explain the Bell concept of non-locality?
Yes, it does.
Does your theory encompass the reality, assuming the reality of UFOs and their supposed ability to travel across thousands of light years almost instantaneously?
Now, we step beyond logic here. Everything I give you is a logical deduction from my basic principles. Basic principle is the acceptance of a real real fifth dimension. Now, I can speculate on that, though. Now, I would guess if there's advanced civilization that has reached a higher level of consciousness and would come to us telepathically rather than UFOs. At this time in physics, in normal everyday physics, there is nothing to say that beings, if they exist on other planets, can come to us. Right now, we can go to planets 5 light years, 10 light years away. We have the technology to know how to do it. Theoretically, it's possible for us to travel. How much would it cost? 20 years of engineering work and $100 trillion. It's economically, practically unfeasible. So if there are intelligent beings, they could come here. There's nothing in physics, present physics outlaws that. I just think they come here telepathically because I would think if they've been around longer than us, they would have already evolved and come telepathically. But does that answer your question?
Well, we can go into the dialogue with
Yeah.
them.
Maybe you find this interesting because my theory also, there's a possibility with my theory of reaching a sixth dimension higher, which would be super enlightenment. I personally think the human race is approaching a new step. Just as consciousness, normal consciousness evolved with our acceptance of the flow of time. As we learn about the fifth dimension, develop our ESP and other powers, I think we'll eventually have a direct realization awareness of the fifth dimension. At that time, we will reach super consciousness and possibly learn of the sixth dimension, even higher. And it could be the advanced beings from other planets have already done that. I would expect they have.
I have just one other thing.
And give a
Where's the spirit? We get a question.
Okay. Spirit, I don't know.
What is the spirit? Because this is...
Spirit is like soul. Spirit is not a scientific term. If you can define what spirit is, I'll find a place. If you define what soul is, but in science we have to define something so we know what to measure or theorize about. Now I can do logical deduction and say a mind, consciousness, complex survives death. If you want to interpret that mind, consciousness, complex as spirit, put that in one. It's okay. Why can't this a science? I've got my intuitive feelings and I've got my reason logic. Reason logic is a science. So I don't know. Because actually our ideas of spirit might be different. I'm trying to remain with the logical and call mind, consciousness, complex. You can interpret that as spirit or ghost or however you want.
Hi, Jim. I'm Janine. And I just have a comment and a question. You talked about when mediums receive information, it is through metaphoric means.
Yeah, because they're basically finding the mind consciousness complex of the dead person in five-dimensional space has to have a way of communicating directly through fifth dimension. No words, no light, no nothing. So it sets up a resonance of something it's familiar with. That does the resonance of something the medium is familiar with, and that's the metaphor.
I'm with you there. But I would like to add from my experiences, there are words, and they're distinctly not my words. And I just like your comments on that, because you did make the point that they do not talk to the brain, which might be, and instead, talking to your mind, which is your consciousness. So, I'm only speaking from my own experience. I do hear distinct words. They are voices that aren't mine, male, female, just like your input on that.
Okay, now in physics, if I say something you hear, why? Because it sets up a vibrational pattern of air particles, and then your ears hear that, your brain interprets it. Now, it can't be a word because it's not traveling through the air. It's going mind to mind. It's just you become so attuned, probably, that, or the mind consciousness complex, the resonance is so strong that your brain is interpreting it as a word. In other words, the metaphor has gotten so exact that you've got it down to words. So I'd say that's higher level. If we become practiced with this, I said we could hear words. But we're not hearing them with our ears physically, through four-dimensional space-time. We're hearing them brain to brain, or consciousness to consciousness down through mind, and then in our case, down the brain. So yeah, it's just better tuning circuits in the brain.
Thank you so very much, Jim.